Let's take a look at object creation. When you create objects, it's important to set up the units of measurement you want to work with. In the Customize menu, select Unit Setup. In this dialog, you can choose options that let you work in the metric system, with feet and inches, with a custom setup, or the default generic units. This lesson uses generic units. Let's see how to create simple shapes. You can select different categories of geometry from this menu in the Create panel. We'll stay with standard primitives. You choose any of these objects and create them in any viewport using a few clicks and drags. Some are simple enough, requiring a single click and drag like a sphere or a teapot. Others require more clicks. A box, for example, needs an initial click and drag for the base. Then once you release the mouse, move and click again to define the height. The same is true for a cylinder, as you can see here. A cone is built like a cylinder, though there's one more mouse move and click to define the upper radius. Other objects will be just as easy to define with a few clicks. Using different viewports lets you create objects that face different directions. For example, create a cylinder in the perspective view, first with a click and drag to define its base, then move the mouse and click once to define the height. Let's not worry about its size for now. We'll discuss object parameters later. When you work in the perspective view, you create a cylinder standing up with its base lying flat on the ground. You get the same orientation creating the cylinder in the top view. However, when you create a cylinder in the front view, notice that the cylinder is lying on its side. This is because there are three default construction planes that are oriented in X, Y, and Z, and represented by the grids in the viewport. So when you create a cylinder in the top view, its base is lying on the grid you see in the perspective viewport. When you create a cylinder in the front view, its base is lying on an invisible vertical grid, represented by this black line in the top view. The same is true if you create an object in the left. The base of that cylinder is aligned with the third construction plane, represented by another black line in the top view. Using different construction planes is faster than having to build an object always standing up and orienting it manually. You can create more grids apart from the three default ones, but it's easier to use a feature called Auto Grid. Let's say we want to build a cylinder representing a bottle on the top of those bench seats. Activate the type of object you want to create, then enable Auto Grid option. In the viewport, a tripod appears and updates you to move the cursor across the surface. This indicates the face orientation of the object, and by creating an object there, an individual face becomes the temporary construction plane for your cylinder. It's good to use AutoGrid on a temporary basis, so make sure to turn it off when you're done with it. Once you've created an object, you'll want to go to the Modify panel to change its parameters. Even though the Create panel displays parameters when you first create objects, switching to the Modify panel helps you avoid problems later. In the Modify panel, let's start by changing the object's name. It's a good idea to give your objects a name that is descriptive. That way, when you're working in a scene with lots of objects, you'll be able to find each one more easily. For example, we can rename this cylinder Bottle 001. Adding a number after the name is useful if the object is the first in a series. If you start making duplicates of it, they will be automatically incremented 002, 003, and so on. The color swatch next to the name displays the object's wire color, which is useful for organizing your scene. This color is generated at random and sometimes can be a little hard to see against the background. You can change the wire color, but stay away from using white and red, as these can conflict with object and sub-object selections. For now, the wire color displays on the object in both shaded and wireframe views, but that will eventually change when you apply a material to the object. At that point, the wire color will only show in the wireframe views or when edged faces mode is active. In most cases, you don't need to worry about the object's exact size or other properties when you're creating it. Basically, you first create it and then you go to the Modify panel to adjust parameters like its base radius, height, and so on. For example, let's change the cylinder. Click in the Type In field for the radius and specify a value. Use the spinner arrows to change the radius. Then, change the height by clicking and dragging on the spinners directly. Here's a tip about numerical values. You can change them down to their minimum possible value by right-clicking the spinners. For example, right-click the radius spinner to bring the value down to 0, making the cylinder disappear. However, right-clicking the number of sides brings the value down to 3, which is the minimum value for the parameter which defines the object's level of detail.